Welcome to the Backseat Leadership Podcast, a leadership conversation for those not in the driver's seat of their organizations. You can learn by visiting www.backseatleader.com. And now, here are the hosts of the Backseat Leadership Podcast, Geoff and Brad Merchant.
Well, everybody, welcome back to the Backseat Leadership Podcast, a conversation for those of us who find ourselves not in the front seat of our organizations or the places in which we serve. This is a conversation that's been happening over the course, really, of 2020, and we're excited to continue to journey through that. I'm here. My name is Geoff Kokenauer, and this is my buddy Brad Merchant.
Yep.
And that's how he introduces himself.
That's me.
On a regular basis. We have conversations, Brad, about issues, topics, questions, things that come up in the back seat. And one of the things that can come up in the back seat is we can make mistakes. And oftentimes we can make mistakes in such a way that maybe they feel like catastrophic failures.
Yep.
But the reality is when we frame them in that way, that's what they'll feel like. So we wanted to have a conversation about some of the things over the next couple episodes of mistakes maybe that we've made, because if there's anything that's very clear, and you can listen to these podcasts and find this out, is that we don't have it all figured out.
No.
We're close. No, that's not even true.
Yep.
We're on a journey. We're
close.
all journeymen in this whole conversation, journey women, and we're trying to figure out what it means to do this well. And so in the process, we've learned some things from the mistakes we've made. And today, because Brad is so humble and so magnanimous,
Most humble guy I know.
he has told us these things. He has decided, you know what, I think I'm going to share my mistakes first. And so, Brad, as we dive into this conversation, we're grateful for the experiences that we've had, but out of those experiences, we've learned from some things that haven't gone exactly how we thought they'd go. And so, Brad, take us in. You've got 4 of them today. What are some of the biggest mistakes? And this isn't necessarily COVID mistakes. I mean, I feel like the last 6 to 7 months has been just a compressed amount of time, and so it can be very easy to go, well, these are the only things I'm thinking about. This is over the last 5-10 years of leading in the back seat. So, Brad, take us in. Your biggest mistakes. Don't get insecure about it. It's going to be okay.
I feel really insecure.
Your biggest mistakes.
Vulnerable.
In the backseat.
You know, Geoff, like you said, I mean, we've been in backseat leadership roles now for really almost the last decade of our lives, and wow, there's been a lot that we've learned, and some through mentors, some through succeeding, a lot through mistakes. And so today actually could be about part 1 of a 20-part episode talking about those mistakes I've made. But I wanted to take, okay, what are the broad categories? Because I think about a lot of vignettes in my mind of mistakes that I've made. And what could the movie title be for each of those vignettes if I can categorize them? And so there's 4. I want to start with the first one. Here's one of the biggest mistakes I think I made as a backseat leader. And it's this. It's envying other leaders instead of learning from them. Envying other leaders instead of learning from them. I just remember so many times, especially early on, I would see guys in particular who in ministry were doing things that I just flat out couldn't do. Whether it be from a gifted standpoint or a positional standpoint. There's just either authority they had or gifts that they had that I did not have. And what did I do? Well, instead of being a student of them and saying, what can I learn from this individual? How can I take what they do really well and try to emulate it to the best I can? Instead of doing that, what did I do? I would get mad. I would get frustrated. I would get, I guess you call it envious. I'd look at them and start to complain internally, grumble inside. Not audibly, but certainly inside of me. It was a voice that's very loud that was just complaining to me about, wow, why do I have the gifts that I have and not the gifts that person has? Or why do they get to do that when I should be able to do that? And on the narrative would go. And as a result, I think I lost a lot of opportunities to learn because I spent so much energy and time and focus on envying those around me instead of being a student of them. And wow, I could think of so many examples of that. But this certainly was, I think in one case in particular, was someone who was pretty close to me in age who was at another church pretty far away from where my church was at the time. And we would stay in contact every once in a while. But I got to see they post pictures online of them, leading some event or getting some award or getting to preach or a lot of different things. And I just remember looking at that, and instead of like, man, I need to pick that guy's brain and just, how does he do that? How does he lead well in his position? Instead, I just got envious, and over time, I found myself just getting almost bitter towards this person and distanced myself from them, and the friendship eventually evaporated because of that. And I look back on just that one vignette and think, wow, even that instance, I wasted so much time just looking at him and thinking, he has something that I deserve. And I spent a lot of time doing that. And that's one thing I think I'd take back.
Yeah, I think it's a thing that happens for a lot of backseat leaders who, look at whether it's age or it's similar position and think, well, it must be better over there, and it must be better over there, and it must be better for them. So there's two responses to that. Either that organization is better. Why am I in the organization I'm in, causing only unrest? Or what am I doing wrong that he's doing? And that has the second question has a way of leveraging you in one direction or the other. Are you going to press in and learn from that individual, or are you just going to work harder and try and make opportunities take place where you're at? It can be a critical thing, no matter whether you're in the pastorate or you're in other places, looking around and seeing all these different people and different places. And it might be relationships you've had. It might be relationships that are going to come in your way. And there's a quality about learning from those individuals. And we'll talk more about this at the very end, because your mistakes kind of, there are some themes that can kind of come out of that I think are beneficial. So that's number one. Envying other leaders instead of learning from them is that's a good thing for us to learn from. Thanks for sharing that with us. Now, what's number two?
Yeah, so the second biggest mistake I think would be this. It'd be looking so far ahead that I can't see the present. So looking so far ahead that I can't see the present. What do I mean by that? I remember having so much ambition, and this is still true. I have a lot of ambition, but I remember at the time it was misplaced ambition. It was an arrow aimed in the wrong direction. And what was happening? Well, I was dreaming, I was longing to be in a idealized position in my own mind. And what happened? Well, I started to take for granted the role that I had, and I started to actually grow bitter even as I started to think, man, I just can't wait to be at the next stage. And as a result, I think there were many days where I look back now and I cherish the memories I had in that role, but at the time I was just ready to get out of there. And I think all of us are in that in some degree. I think 10 years from now, Geoff, we'll be looking at the roles that we have right now, and we will look back with fondness. We won't remember all the difficulties.
Right.
But right now, sometimes what we do in the present, and I've found this to be true of myself, what I tend to do is I tend to exaggerate all of the weaknesses and downplay the strengths. But then when I get to the future, what do? I look back and I actually exaggerate the strengths and downplay the weaknesses. And I think there's wisdom in doing what you will do now. And that is right now saying, what do I have to be thankful for? Sure. No organization's perfect. My church isn't perfect. The people I work with aren't perfect. I'm not perfect, for goodness sakes. But what can I enjoy today? And I think, looking back, that was a big mistake for me. I was so focused on where I'm going that I couldn't see what was around me, and as a result, I didn't just live with this easy state of calm and contentment. I was frantic inside. I was like a locomotive ready to move on to the next stage. And I think that's something backseat leaders have to be careful for, especially backseat leaders who want to be in the front seat.
Absolutely.
You have to be really careful of that.
I think you identify something I think we all experience, but maybe we don't necessarily identify. And that is this notion the future is undefined for us, right? We have an idea, I'm sure, of where we want to be. But the future is a utopian ideal that we get to create. The present is our current reality and the interpretation that we have of that reality. And so it's easy for us to look into the future of what we want, not knowing what's going to come in between now and then that's going to be difficult. It's going to be adversity that's going to shape us. It's going to refine us in the process of getting from here to there. And if we did know, maybe we wouldn't go that way. The whole adage of, if I knew that it was what it was going to take to get here, then maybe I wouldn't have gone this way or pursued this thing. And I think that's interesting that it is easy to look in the future at this ideal of what we want and lose focus of what we have. And so that's critical, I think, and it's a great challenge for us. So first one, envying other leaders instead of learning from them, and then looking so far ahead that I can't see the present. Two critical things. Thanks for making those mistakes so we can learn from them.
Absolutely.
And now let's get yours. Yours kind of like your mistakes kind of go a little more personal each time. So let's get a little bit more to the core here. What's number 3?
Yeah, so probably the third biggest would be living by the 3-word mantra that we all know so well, and it goes like this: I know better. I know better.
All the type 8 Enneagrams out there are going, well,
they say amen.
Isn't that how we're supposed to live?
They say amen. Here's how that played out for me. It's really easy when you are not in the driver's seat to judge the intentions, motives, and actions of the one driving. It's really easy. It's almost instinctive. It's almost like, Geoff, everyone was born with a PhD in critiquing the one in the driver's seat. We're really good at that.
Absolutely.
And I think what I did is I did that so often, but not just critiquing. That's bad enough. But I actually took it a step further.
Uh-oh.
I was varsity in critiquing, Geoff. I was really good at this. I didn't just critique. I critiqued, and then you know what I said? If I was in that position, I would do better. I know better, after all. After all, I'm way more wise. I don't have as much experience. Heck, I haven't been through as much as life as this person. But I'm
those things notwithstanding,
I'm more wise.
You are.
And I would believe that. And you know what that does in a backseat leader is it makes them really cynical.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That makes a very toxic backseat leader. In fact, that is an expendable backseat leader, because no one needs a person like that in the car. Nobody wants a person like that in the car. They don't. What do? They're not contributing anything to the culture, especially. Right. In fact, all they're doing, they're filling the air with narcissism. And Geoff, you and I know well. We've worked in the church long enough. People know how to do that instinctively. And especially if you're listening to this podcast and you work in the church, one of the worst things you can do is live with the mantra, I know better, because what will inevitably happen, that's going to come across, not only even if you never speak, even if you're mute for the rest of your life, it's going to come across in your actions, your body language, and people see that. They pick up on it, and it just fills the culture, fills the air, and it makes it really toxic and poisonous. And as I look back, I think, wow, Brad, what an idiot. I remember Tim Keller saying, this is a great quote, he said, almost all of us look back at our past selves, and we say, what a fool, what a fool. He said, but what that means is that 15 years from now, you're going to look at your present self and say, what a fool, what a fool. What does that do? It's not meant to lead us into despair, of course, but it's meant to lead us into humility, to humble ourselves that here's what it means, I'm not as wise as I'd like to think that I am. I'm not. In fact, too many of us believe our own press release. And I did that a lot. And I think if I can go back, I would sit down with Brad and I would say, yeah, I actually think you're a fool. And you would serve others well by assuming that the person who's leading you knows what's best.
Sure.
Even if they get it wrong.
Right.
I think that's a big mistake that I made. Just living by that mantra, I know better.
And it's interesting because we all see from our vantage point how to do it better. The problem is our vantage point isn't everybody's vantage point. It isn't the experiential vantage point that the leader might have. And so that I think it's really easy for backseat leaders to see that, because oftentimes it's the decisions of the front seat leader that change the backseat leader's role, and the backseat leader often has to make significant efforts to achieve the front seat leader's vision, and oftentimes, in unhealthy situations mostly, the backseat leader doesn't have a seat at the table to be heard with what they do see to the front seat leader. And so I find those things to be kind of interesting. Brad, if I want to dig in a little bit here, just a little bit. We have a little bit of time here. I'm just curious for yourself when it comes to moving away from living according to that three-letter word or three-letter phrase, three-word phrase. I knew what I was saying. What do you think was the most significant mindset shift for you to learn from I know better? What did you have to start programming in your mind? Maybe you even had to, like, I don't know if you put a phrase up or something like that just helped you think through this. What was the thing you did to help make sure your default mechanism, because often it can, until it's checked, it can be a default mechanism. What did you do to make sure you were fighting I know better?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of answers come to mind. I think one that we'll talk about here in just a few minutes is having wise friends. Wise friends. Now, what I don't mean by that is having a bunch of Gandalfs around you who are wise philosophers. That would be amazing, but that's not what I'm talking about. I
feel like I'm not your Gandalf.
I don't think I've ever met a Gandalf. You are more like Frodo. Or Pippin. You're Pippin.
I don't know if either one of those is a compliment or
you're
not.
Sam. You're Sam. I'm probably Pippin, let's be honest. I digress. So I would say, Geoff, here's what I mean by wise friends. I mean friends who are willing to tell you the hard things and for you to listen and for them to do it out of love. We have friends like this, Geoff, that they'll tell you hard things with their eyes looking down upon you. And it doesn't feel like love, doesn't it? It feels more like judgment. We're laughing because we know we've had experiences like this in the past. We're not going to name names. We've had experiences. You don't need to say anymore, Geoff, I promise. But you know what I'm saying.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's right. But you know what I'm saying. It feels like judgment. But you know the friends you also have that are willing to look you in the eye and say, I think you're missing this. I want to help you. That feels more like love. It's hard, but it feels more like love. And I wish I would have had more friends early on who would have helped me do that. But in regards to, how did I get out of that I know better mantra? It was by having wise friends who are willing to say, Brad, you're being really proud. You're being very judgmental. You're being arrogant. In fact, you're more foolish than you assume that you are. And it took me a while to get friends like that, but I'm really thankful for them. I really needed that. I wish I had them sooner. It really helped.
Yeah, that's good.
A quote that comes to mind, Geoff, I found this the other day when I was reading a book, and I saved it because it was so good. So not to just theologize things, but we're going to theologize things.
Is this a dead writer? Or
It is.
Okay.
It is. I'm sorry. Old Puritan.
Typical.
Love the Puritans. So obviously let's go back into the Bible. Genesis 3, what happens? Well, essentially what we're talking about is happening on a cosmic level where Adam and Eve actually start living by this mantra that I know better with the help of Satan.
That's exactly right.
And what do? They dethrone God.
That's right.
They make themselves demigods. That they know how to rule in the universe better. They have more wisdom, essentially. And how foolish. We look at that, we say how foolish. But when you think about backseat leaders, you think about just us as human beings, okay, taken out of the organizational rallies, just as human beings, we tend to think that we know best, that we are all wise. That's the assumption that leads to I know better.
Well, because of Adam and Eve, it's programmed into the human experience, right?
It's true.
I mean, it's normal for us to have this sense of what I know is the most important thing to know, and what I know is the best thing.
That's true. That's
know.
right.
So yeah.
And so I found this quote really, really convicting and helpful. The guy said this. He said, if God would concede to me his omnipotence, in other words, big fancy word for his power. So if God were to give me his power for 24 hours, you would see how many changes I would make in the world. And don't we all feel that?
Yeah.
We see the world right now as we're recording this, 2020, world's just crazy. We're like, man, there's so many things I would change. But then listen to the next line. But if he gave me his wisdom too, I would leave things just the way they are. In other words, what is he saying? He's saying God is this beautiful mix of all power, but all wisdom. And if we were to have both, we actually wouldn't change a thing, because everything he does is is in wisdom. And I think, how does that relate to us who are listening to this? If you're a backseat leader, here's how it relates to you. You are exactly where God wants you right now. In fact, where you're at isn't a mistake. God's got an awesome plan. He's not let you see the blueprint, but you're playing along perfectly. And I think the best thing you could do today is humble yourself and say, Lord, how can I learn from the people that are around me? That's what helps attack the demon of I know better. And I wish that I would have had that sooner.
That's so good. And I think you're exactly right. I think it can be very, very easy if you don't have people around you who are calling you out on those blind spots and saying, hey, you need to work on this. And we've had many, 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 many conversations along these lines. And but I love what you say. I mean, and I hope that our listeners heard this encouragement, that you may not know the blueprint, but you're supposed to be playing along in the role that you're in. You wouldn't be where you are if there wasn't a purpose for you to fulfill that. And so, I think of the backseat leader who's in an organization where they don't feel like they're heard, or they don't feel like they can offer their vision or their perspective, that it will get better. There comes a point where you've got to start leading up. You've got to start working towards those conversations, and then realize if they don't change, that there's two questions you have to ask. I wouldn't do it that way, but I'm not doing it, so I will do it that way. I'll do it differently later. And the second part is how do I do what I'm supposed to do inside the context in which I'm in? Totally. And so I would just affirm that encouragement and say, for that backseat leader who we're coming to the end of the year, and you're thinking about, is 2021 a time for me to make a change? I think sometimes we make shifts quickly because we think we can figure it out. But what we don't recognize is how big the seat is up front, all the responsibility that comes with the seat. Like, I think we think that driving the front seat of all of our organizations is like driving a Tesla that's automatically driving for you.
It's true. When
it's more like flying a Boeing 747. And there's all kinds of switches and knobs and all these kind of things that you have to learn how to use. Brad, so we've covered 3: envying other leaders instead of learning from them, looking so far ahead I can't see the present, living by the 3-word mantra, I know better. And his last one, we've kind of touched on it. You kind of hinted at it. You kind of moved that direction. But tell us about the last one. And friendships.
Yeah, and Geoff, this is probably, honestly, I'm looking at the whole list, this is probably the biggest one I made. Appreciating friendship. Okay, appreciating friendship, but not valuing it.
It's an interesting distinction.
It is, because think about this, Geoff. I appreciate birds. I appreciate them. In fact, I love springtime when kind of all the snow has melted and that wintry breeze leaves the earth, and all of a sudden, what do you see for the first time in a long time? The sun. And what do you feel? You feel heat, and you start to see green all around you, and life kind of come up from the ground. It's almost like a resurrection of a sense. And what do you hear? You hear birds chirping, and I love it in the mornings. I mean, I just love waking up to hearing birds chirping in my front yard and this tree that's right by our front door. It's amazing. But I don't value birds. Okay, I'm not going to buy a bird and make it a pet. I mean, it's a waste of my money, waste of my time. Not going to feed it. I love it in the morning, chirping in the tree. Don't love it chirping in my house. Not going to have it. I appreciate birds. Don't value them enough to have them or commit to them. A lot of us treat friendships that way. We appreciate them. When we see a friend every now and then, we're like, that was fun. That was fun. We'll do it again sometime. I've met very few people who value friendships.
Sure.
A friend of mine, this was a couple of weeks ago, old friend, really wise, he said, Brad, you should make it your life's goal to find 2 to 3 good friends who will covenant to do friendship with you for the rest of your life. That should be your life's goal.
It's an interesting word.
Many of us don't think that way. Why? Because we have been discipled by corporate America. What do? We, instead of chasing after friendships, what do? We chase after the next ring on the ladder. How can I move up? How can I get more famous? How can I get more followers? How can I have a bigger platform? And you know what? I've never met someone. Maybe there is someone out there. I've never met someone who on their deathbed is so thankful that they got so high up on the ladder. But here's what I have met. In fact, there's 2 instances that come to mind that I can't share, but vivid in my mind, of visiting with 2 people who were dying, who had no friends, no relationships. They were all alone. Why? Because they invested all of their life in business or just their own family members, which I love my family. But at the end of the day, we need friends.
Yeah.
And I think something I just regret looking back, I wasted many years where I could have cultivated friendships, but I was too focused on climbing a ladder up a building that just is totally irrelevant instead of digging deep trenches that could just really flood my life with blessing and joy. And those trenches being friendships. And looking back, I think that was a big mistake. That's something I've been trying to recorrect over the last couple of years, really. But I think that was probably the biggest mistake I made as a backseat leader.
Yeah, that's a significant one. And when you are just simply trying to climb the ladder and you only appreciate friendships become a means to an end, right? Where it's only, well, I have this friend because this friend helps me accomplish this thing that I want to put in my resume or I want to use.
It's all utility.
And so there's no value to the person. It's so critical. I think you said something that I thought was really interesting, and it has to do with those friends. You have a long-term friend who wants to invest in you still. And I always love Doug Fields, a great teacher on youth ministry, but also just family and things like this. And one of the primary friendships that you should have is with your spouse or your significant other. Whether you're married or not, there's going to be people who are going to be in your life this way. And hopefully, if you are married, then that your spouse is that significant friendship, that one that cannot be replaced. And Doug always would talk about how you can be replaced in your job. I can be replaced in my job tomorrow. I can find another job because I live in the state of Indiana right now, where I can probably find another job the next day. We've got some stuff, but you cannot be replaced with your spouse. You really can't be replaced with your friends. And especially those close-knit ones, the ones that you value the most, the ones who you can pick it up and it's been 2 months, but it feels like it's been 2 days. It's those friendships that you can have those hard conversations. It's those friendships where you can go over and lament everything that's going on, and they'll listen to you, and then in love, they'll respond to you and challenge you to be a better you. Those are the ones you can't replace. You can't just pick and choose those. Those take time to find, and they take time to forge, and they don't happen overnight. But you can be replaced overnight in the job that you're in. And so I just think that's a critical thing to think about, and hopefully helpful to our listeners, how we value friendships, how we value people. I had a friend, his name's Derry Prankert. He runs a podcast called My Third Decades, talking about being in youth ministry for 3 decades now, and he would always tell me, Geoff, you use people. He did not say you use people.
No, he did not say that.
He said you use things, you value people. You value people and you use things, and don't get the two confused. I think it came from his mom, which means it's the most wise thing ever.
Amen.
And I've always thought that's a really helpful mantra to live by.
Yep.
So you don't get those two things confused. Brad, thanks for sharing these mistakes. And I know that when we talk about mistakes for backseat leaders, it's almost like, well, you can't talk about your mistakes because that means that next evaluation.
You're human.
That next rung up is going to be harder to get to. And I think it's important for us to be, as a type 8 on the Enneagram who isn't always self-reflective and doesn't really love being reflective, it's important to reflect back and think about these things that you've learned from, because I'm sure this was helpful for you to even to put into words. These are the things that I've made mistakes on. And next time, apparently we're going to talk about my mistakes, which is just going to be great. I can't wait.
I cannot wait.
And I can't wait to
record. It's going to be a 2-hour-long episode, guys.
It's probably going to be at least 2 hours long. Hey, Brad, if one of our listeners has loved what they've heard, or they want to add to the conversation, where can they find us?
Yeah, so you should find us on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. And you can find us on Instagram and Twitter specifically at Backseat Leader. We'd love to hear from you. And on Facebook, you can find us at Backseat Leadership Podcast. And then, man, if we would love to hear from you. Yeah. We would love to hear from you. In fact, Geoff, I know we've gotten some emails from some people about content that they've loved. We'd love to hear from you. If you go to backseatleader.com, be a great way for you to find us. You could submit some questions, some content that you want to hear from us. We'd love to talk about it. So we appreciate this conversation because we want you to be a part of this conversation. We are not the experts.
Nope.
No, we are just journeymen, and we're really excited to continue this conversation with you.
Thanks, Brad, for a great episode. We'll see you next time on the Backseat Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and leave a review to help other backseat leaders join the conversation. For more information, visit www.backseatleader.com.